From the wonderful world of television and video post-production, editor, colorist, technical producer, composer for over 30 years, 40 years. I made a mistake already. Welcome, Graham Saywell.
Thanks for having me.
So on your profile on LinkedIn, which is where I reconnected with you, you write, old dog, new tricks.
That's it.
So explain, what does that mean?
I think, and we could probably spend a whole dedicated interview talking about ageism in the industry and in all industries, really.
It's part of life, but sadly,
it is. It is part of life. I think, that whole adage, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. Well, I'm here to say that that's basically crap. I've spent my entire life working in post-production, as you know, and worked with technology as it evolved. And so every step of the way was learning a new trick. And just because I became older, that didn't mean I wasn't able to absorb the technology. And going from what used to be millions and millions of dollars worth of equipment that took up computer rooms with racks, and I'm now working on a very souped up, mind you, Mac and monitoring system in my studio. That's part of the game. So you have to learn the new tricks, and I've been able to do that. And so for me, it was reinforcing. Hey, I might be older, but I'm not anywhere near done yet, and I could teach you a few things, some of you younger guys, and so
I think I'm 2 years or 3 years younger than you, so you could probably teach me something.
Yeah.
So old dog. Okay. So here I'll how they test Trump on his cognitive ability.
Oh yeah, right.
I have a memory game for you.
Oh great.
Memory game. When did we meet? I bet you can't remember.
Very specifically or approximately?
Roughly.
I'm gonna say 1986 or 85.
Wrong.
Oh, okay.
Wrong. CKLN.
Oh my goodness!
The Ryerson campus radio station.
Right.
So you were the station manager.
I was, yeah.
Right. So you're probably in. I'm a fresh-faced first year at Ryerson. You're in third year, and I went down to CKLN.
1980. Then we're talking.
Well, for me, it would have been yes. It would have been
81.
for me. It would have been fall of. So I would have walked in, and you were the station manager. Yeah. So. That's how we met, and I was assigned as a first-year student. I was teamed with a fellow named John Jones, who you might remember.
Yes.
And we did a weekly show together called Artist Spotlight. John went on to CFNY and Much Music, mainly in management, but he had great pipes, sort of like you do. You've got great pipes, so he did most of the talking on our show together. I was terrible, and I still am. But and then by second year, I did a comedy thing with a bunch of my classmates.
Was that Bill Keenan and those guys?
No, they're older. They're older than me. That's tough
show.
to do a half hour. To do a half hour comedy a week is not realistic.
Yeah.
Like 5 minutes maybe, but it was like. It was an in-house radio station, 102.9. Didn't you stay around for a couple more years?
I stayed around for one more year
to get it on air. 88.1
to do the license application.
Right.
And once that application was in the system, and basically we knew it would be approved, then I left, and Anton Leo became the second full-time station manager. The first year when you met me, I was just the student like everybody else, and I was paid a very small honorarium. We applied to the Ryerson Board of Directors and whoever else was involved. We were an incorporated entity by then to create a full-time management position because the radio station had to have it in order to qualify for the CRTC license. You couldn't have a totally volunteer-run license. So I remember there was controversy, I've given myself a job. Hey, guess what? That job paid like $8,000 a year or something.
Right.
Anyway,
I hope you invested some.
Yes, I did. Anton Leo and John Jones, then, as you mentioned, they took over. They were physically there for the flipping of the switch when it went on the air at 88.1. Anton Leo went on to become the head of CBC English Language Services, like a distinguished career with the CBC, running all of the entertainment. He was also a comedian, so he was very involved with the television side. So it's interesting. There's been a lot of
People come out of that.
alumni that have come out of that. May Potts, who
Yes.
most people know
I read the
now,
news on her show briefly. I mean, she was awesome then.
and she's won and been
She was fully
recognized. Yep,
She's still working. So she's still
she
on
is.
the air.
She's at Boom 97.3.
But
Anyway,
you were. I mean, most people, if you go to a radio station campus, you're interested in music.
yep,
You are a musician. Is that
I
correct?
am, and I
Where-
left my brief music career to come to Ryerson.
Weren't you a this is my memory working now. Weren't you a roadie for Chris de Burgh or something
Yeah.
like that? I don't know why I remember
Yes,
that.
yes.
So-
When I left Ryerson, when I left CKLN, I went and a friend of mine, Gary Howsam, who was also RTA grad, quite a bit older than us. He sort of went as an adult. He had started a music rehearsal studio called Greenlight Productions, and so he asked me if I'd like to come and kind of manage it for him,
Right.
because he was busy doing other stuff. And so I did, and invested a bit of money in it. We're not talking thousands of dollars here. It was pretty small. But one of the bands that rehearsed out of there was Chris de Burgh's backup band. They were all from Toronto. And having spent like 3 or 4 weeks with them in the studio, they needed somebody to be basically a guitar and keyboard technician. And would I be interested? And going from $200 a week Canadian to 500 US cash money was like, okay. And getting to go on the road with like that caliber of musician, which I never would have become or never have become.
Big hits, Lady in Red, right?
Lady in Red, Spanish Train, Don't Pay the Fare. Anyway, so Chris de Burgh in his own right was huge
Yes.
in the UK and Europe and in
Yes.
Canada. Not so much in the States. We toured around, and then that summer we toured with Supertramp and Joe Cocker. It was 3 together. It was Supertramp's last tour of the original band. And there were full shows. There were outdoor festival things, like 80,000 people. And when we came back off of that, the record company had him opening. Now, Chris de Burgh is the opening act for Asia, the band Asia.
Wow. Supergroup.
The supergroup that had super ego, super attitude. That tour failed. We did a month, maybe 20 shows,
Right.
and then they shut it down. It was terrible. They were terrible. Like, it was just all we're Asia. But individually, the musicians.
Those are the guys from Yes and,
Yep,
and
Steve Howe was a lovely guy.
Emerson,
and-
Lake and Palmer.
Yeah, Carl
and-
Palmer on drums. Jeffrey Downs was the keyboard player, and I can't remember who the other guy was. But anyway, it was like all, amps to 11. It was like Spinal Tap on drugs. Nobody gave a shit about anybody else. It was just, and it was our manager, Chris de Burgh's manager, Kenny Thompson, who was also Doogie Thompson from Supertramp, the bass player's brother. So there's a connection there.
Right.
He also did front of house. So he'd go out to the front of house desk to mix Chris for the opening. And he says, I look down and there are banks of graphic equalizers for the PA system. He says, they're all in bypass. And he said to the Asia sound guy, he says, what's with this? He says, oh, do you want to use them? Go ahead. He says, I have no control. They were literally they just got up. Everything was to 11. They played as loud as they could, and there was equipment hanging from the ceiling. It was just all flash and dash, and it was the 80s. I mean, it should have been, but it was, yeah, and it didn't take long for word to get around. Hey, they're a good band in the studio. They got a couple of hits, heat of the moment, some other stuff. Live,
Right.
it's just a cacophony of crap. And Carl Palmer was an asshole. He kept saying, oh, Chris de Burgh sells more records than us in Europe. And we're going, yeah, well, there's probably a reason for that, And he's still touring. He's still going around. I connect with him occasionally on
Chris de Burgh, you
Facebook.
mean? Chris de Burgh, you mean?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've got, for me, that was, I had a 9-month or I'd say a year and change with the 2 tours I did, the 3 tours, as my pinnacle of, I got to live that life.
The rock and roll
And so
lifestyle.
for me, it's a super important period of my life, and I have great memories of it. You know, these guys are doing it their whole lives. Would they remember? And I found an old newspaper clipping. Somebody mentioned there's a song called Patricia the Stripper that was on his first album, Spanish Train, that everybody. And, if Patricia the Stripper was alive today, she'd be 100 years old because the song took place in 1924 or whatever. And I had a photograph from a newspaper in Munich of myself, the other roadie, Chris's wife, one of our truck drivers. We used to get up, and they always had a stripper as part of the show. It was
Like
on
a
the
real
rider.
stripper.
Yeah, a real stripper. And she'd
Hired locally.
Yeah, and she'd come out during Patricia the Stripper and start to do a dance, and then Bruce and I would have we were dressed up as bobbies, English bobbies, and we would walk out.
Oh, you went on stage
and grab her, and then instead of taking her away, we'd end up all doing this high kick thing. It was hilarious.
Wow.
It was my 2 minutes of fame every night.
Wow. It's like
So I posted this picture, and Chris responded like, "Oh my God, what a memory and what a great shot!" And he says, all of these moments that he understood that for me was a big moment. The fact I kept that. Who would have kept a newspaper from 40 years ago? I did. I did it for 2 tours, and then one more with the same band, a different artist. And then my wife gave birth to our first child, and so that was it for me. I started looking for a real job.
Well, and that's maybe when I met you, because
Yep.
now we're up to about 87. Suddenly, I run into you at this place. It might have been 87 in
Yeah.
there, because that's when I started this
Yep.
particular job. Suddenly, you're an editor. So I knew you, and you would have recognized me, and I recognized you.
Yeah, of course.
But how did that happen? How did you become an editor?
Well, when I came back off the road,
You were a senior editor, really, the only main editor at a place called The Right Spot, right?
That's right. I was the only editor. Yeah.
A little boutique editing house. The company I worked at was one of the places we used, and you were right around the corner from us.
That's right. Yeah, we were very convenient. No, when I got back off the road, I mean, I wanted to be in the music side of the business, whether it was on the radio side. I did a very brief stint at Q107. They got me to do overnight fill-in shifts for some guy. If he was too, wasted to show up for a show, they'd call me. And I realized...
You were on air?
Uh-huh.
Wow.
Yeah, overnights.
Cool.
I think I did a half a dozen shifts. I wanted to do something else in radio. I didn't want to be a disc jockey.
Right.
I wanted to be in programming or music or something else. But anyway, coming back off the road, I had a very good friend, also Ryerson grad. David Wilson was his name. He ended up at the Journal and then CBC News for the balance of his career. He said, "Oh, you know how to do audio because you've been working sound with all of the..." I said, "Well, we're talking massive PA systems, not..." So, holding a boom mic or putting a lav on somebody and push and play and record on a portable VCR shouldn't be a problem for you. And I said, "No, I don't think so." But so I started doing that, and I got introduced to this company, which owned the Right Spot, BTV, business television.
Right.
And they paid like $100 and something a day, which then was okay. And they gave me more work. They had a little edit suite, 2 3/4 inch decks, straight cuts. I think you could do a fade to black. There was a
interesting
button.
economics, because you're getting paid $100 a day, and I'm pretty sure we're probably paying $100 an hour to hire you. So somebody is, I guess you got to buy the equipment, et cetera, et cetera. So
Well, we know how that's changed, right?
Yes.
But anyway,
the equipment was incredibly expensive.
Sure it was. They owned their own camera. They had a little editing room, but not that they could rent it out, really. It was very straightforward. They did all strictly corporate stuff, a lot of food-related stuff, Loblaws and the Food Marketing Institute and training videos. And the producers would shoot, and they would edit their own stuff. It was quite a closed package. And one of the producers, a guy by the name of Mike Giamprini,
He was my year at Ryerson, too.
Right.
Yeah.
said, "You know what? I really hate editing." He says, "How about I show you how to edit? Because that would be great for me, because then I won't have to do it." And I was kind of their technical person at that point. I went out on shoots. Right. I looked after their equipment. So I had a good technical. I've always had a good technical understanding. I went, sure, that'd be fun, you know. So I started doing that, and then we decided, okay, the quality of the videos that they were producing when compared to other corporate video production companies was lacking. We couldn't even do a dissolve between cameras, right?
Right.
It was cuts only. Well, we need what was then called an AB roll edit suite. So you needed an edit controller, you needed a switcher, and you needed multiple VTRs, and then the world was changing from 3/4 inch to Betacam was the thing. And so I just took it on, and I got to build a studio, and I just threw myself 120% into learning everything, and I loved it. And then having done that, we were still pretty new, but the reputation was good. I had a pretty good reputation, and so got offered a job at an actual post house.
Well, from my point of view, you guys were an actual post house. You,
Well,
you had a niche, right? So
we were, for
Yeah.
sure. And that little post house, ironically, and you mentioned earlier off camera, Jim Smith, who was a
Yep.
sales guy they brought in, who was a hustler, and he got all kinds of people.
Well,
That
he used
little-
to take us to Blue Jay games and
Absolutely. He
and
had,
from my point of view, you'll learn. Okay, this is what a sales guy like Blue Jay games and Leaf. He took us
Yeah.
to a Leaf box once.
yeah, maybe.
Like a bunch. Which and then I ended up when I went freelance. I ended up. He was one of my clients ultimately.
Okay.
So I did.
Right.
He was. I don't know where. I can't even remember where we would have. Maybe we edited them at the right spot. I can't remember. But
Anyway,
I worked for him. So,
that little edit suite did like $750,000 worth of business a year
right.
for the 2 or 3 years it was running like that.
Right.
And then they sold it.
Wow.
I mean, they sold the company. The equipment got sold off, and it was uncanny. You talk to people, oh, that's impossible. I'm going.
Yeah.
We were booked solid
Yeah.
all the time. I had 2-3 sessions a day in there, 5 days a week, sometimes weekends.
Yeah.
And then I was fortunate enough that when I left and they were kind of closing that part down, I went to another company that was predominantly focused on corporate video clients, and so I had a lot of my clients come over with me. When that was always a big bonus if you were moving somewhere. Hey, I can bring some work with me.
Right. Now you're always a musician through this period, or is it helpful to being an editor, being a musician as well? Because a lot of editors I know or three I know are drummers, for instance.
Yep.
Does that do you see a connection between
Oh, absolutely.
being a musician?
I mean, I will tell you a couple of things. Obviously, your sense of timing, and everybody knows editing. There's timing involved, and so
Rhythm and pace and things like that. Right?
all of those things.
Yeah.
You know, not just being able to count to 4, but especially when a lot of the original corporate video stuff would have a music track, and there would
Yes.
always be some kind of an opening.
Yeah.
And it was usually some kind of an industrial soundtrack provided by Network or one of those music services. And so it was always da 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 da, big beats and big things. And so you could sit there and, yeah, I hear those beats. I know where they fall on the track, and I can sit here and push buttons to match those cuts.
Yeah. And it definitely, if you're using music, it influences
Yeah.
your editing for sure.
On the other side, I worked on a series more recently called Confucius Was a Foodie. And it was a lower budget food and travel show done by a company called Lofty Sky Entertainment, who are a great production company. They do more documentary work than that, but they were a limited budget. They had purchased some music from a composer, but after we'd done 2 seasons of it, and I was editing and finishing, it's the last real job that I did offline editing on, and it was more to help them out than anything. But I got so sick and tired of this repetitive music stuff. I only had a choice of this many tracks.
Right.
So I thought, this is stupid. I had a digital keyboard in my studio tied to, then I think it was just GarageBand
So that's
or
where
something.
the composer part
And,
starts.
and so I said, would you mind if there's a scene here about Paris, and they're going to Paris, and we really need just like a little accordion sort of, we can put some reverb as if there's a guy
So you
on
had
the,
like a synthesizer. Like a
yeah, so
keyboard.
I do it, and they go, wow, that's great. And then
So you play piano as well, or
I play keyboards, guitars, a little bit of drums, but
pretty
with
helpful.
digital, I mean, I play live stuff, but in the studio with I use Logic Pro now, but all the instruments are available.
Right.
A regular cheap old Yamaha digital keyboard that you can
Yeah.
get from Long and McQuaid for $200, you
Yeah.
plug it in, you can play whatever you want. And I
Yeah.
started doing these things, and they loved it. And I loved doing it because it was like,
Right.
oh, this is cool. 'Cause now I'm writing something, and I'm not that an accomplished composer that I would offer that up as a service to other people in terms of saying, yes, I can compose the score for your film,
But
Mr. Scorsese.
they're not complete songs. They're a layer that
Background.
I mean, you're not
And-
supposed to notice in it. You're not supposed to notice editing, and you're not supposed to notice the music. It
Yes,
all blends
in
together.
a
right?
in a lot of cases. I did score a couple of pieces that were used as things like credits, background for credits. So the
Right.
music does stand out on its own. It's there. We all know people don't really watch the credits, and if you're a broadcaster, they poof them off into the corner.
Well,
or
sometimes
they,
I watch the credits, but you're looking for a friend or something.
yeah,
right?
yeah. I
So-
have to take screen grabs when my son's name is up on the credits to say, look, I actually saw the show you worked on.
So I checked your IMBD, which is where
Oh, yes.
they list all your shows. I have zero reference. I have zero mentions on IMBD. Comedy Now, 29 episodes. Confucius Was a Foodie, which
Yep.
you just mentioned, 13 episodes. Come Dine With Me Canada, 240 episodes. What's it like to edit 240 episodes of something? Does it drive you? Do you go crazy?
So Come Dine With Me Canada was a spin-off from the British version called Come Dine With Me. I actually came back to Toronto. I was in Nova Scotia for 4 years while my wife finished off her radio career. And out there, I had quite a bit of work, but the Maritimes is a feast or famine scenario. And anyway, as a result, I came back. While I was here, I was helping out another friend on a cooking show, and I got offered Come Dine With Me Canada. And they said, this is huge. At that time, they only had 40 episodes. If it gets picked up, it's going to be 80 episodes a season, and you've got to be 100% on this show. That's all you're going to do?
Right.
And I'm like, wow. But the money was really good. The post house that brought me back picked up my moving expenses. Like it was like they needed somebody dedicated, and there wasn't anybody in town that was willing to do that. So we created a factory. There were 3 of us that worked on it. I had a student that we hired from Mohawk. The other guy that had been the assistant editor at this place, we kind of moved him up. And one of us, the student, would load all the footage. Terry would do the conforming. I would do all the color correction and packaging, and we spat it out the door. And it was also the time that the Fukushima disaster happened, which, as a sideline, wiped out the tape factory business in Japan.
Right.
The biggest tape manufacturer was in that area, and it got so all of a sudden we had to launch into digital delivery, and we were the first TV series that delivered digitally. So we not only we mastered stuff to it was all HD, but I mean it was crazy, and yeah, it was a factory. It was like 3.5 years of just living and breathing. But thank God it was a great show because, had it been not. So
Now it's called lifestyle television, right?
Yep.
As opposed to like reality television. This
That's
is a
right.
very specific
Yeah.
genre. And you've edited literally hundreds of episodes, right?
Yeah.
So did you ever direct? Did you ever want to direct?
No.
So you're always
no, I
you found
directed.
your home in post.
I directed and produced a training video on plumbing supplies
Right.
back in
And it went
19.
bad.
No, I won
Really?
I won an ITVA award for it, and I said, "That's it. I peaked. I'm never doing those again. I don't want to. I don't want to be disappointed."
running into you at a couple of those award shows, and
Yeah.
you were always very nice to me. So, because you were, here's this older guy who's very nice to me. Like 2 years, you're 2 years older. Everything evens out. So I definitely noticed your recent post on LinkedIn. That's when I contacted you because I loved it because it's you're refreshingly honest, right? So there's just so much BS out there in the world, including LinkedIn, really. I mean, your words kind of leapt off the page, so I'm going to read a little bit of it. Your words. One thing I've learned in the post business is that you have to be flexible and adaptable to keep food on the table. I've had gaps, like most in the industry, and fill them by driving a school bus, driving Uber, And I also became a certified home inspector. So, which I loved because there was actual honesty. There's so much people just peddling, BS in terms of what working life is really like. So, what motivated you to write this, to make this
Well, I
post?
mean, I had also posted not that long ago that I was looking for my next project, which is
Right.
very often what you do.
Yeah.
And I had a very busy 2023, and 2024 has been very quiet. And I'm not worried. I mean, things come along, but there had been times in the past where I did have bigger gaps. When I was out in the Maritimes, the what basically made me think of coming back east, or coming back east, that doesn't sound right. Coming back to Ontario, to the center of the universe, apparently.
Right. Moving west.
Yeah. CanWest Global went bankrupt back in 2009, I believe. And so, there wasn't a risk of them stopping. They would be sold off, as the Asper's kid managed to bankrupt them. But what happened was there was an immediate halt in all productions that were happening for networks like the Food Network, HGTV, etc. So it just so happened at the time that all of the shows I was working on out there were food related or HGTV related. And so they all stopped. So I went from being really busy to having nothing. And I was starting to get a little cabin fever. My wife was still working on in the radio and local radio station. And I'm like, I got to do something. I'm like, it's not just about making money. It was about personal kind of sanity. I saw an ad for a local school bus company, and I thought that can't, be a bad thing. I mean, I'll get a commercial driver's license out of this, if nothing else, because we train you. You've seen the ads, So I went and did it, and I never signed on as a full-time driver. I stayed as a spare. I only drove for maybe 4 months back and forth, but it was great. It gave me something to do.
Yeah.
The fact it paid less than minimum wage was irrelevant. When I came back to Toronto, we had another gap, and so I had actually driven for a fellow Ryerson graduate who owned a company called MSL Transport, and they do shuttle bus services for the hospitals. They do the University Health Network and so on. So I drove for him for a little bit, just off and on. And I thought, well, that's touchy because I've got to commit to a schedule. And if somebody phones me for a video job, what am I going to do? So I thought, why don't I see what Uber's like? So I did the Uber thing. And as I mentioned in my thing, I got a job out of that. I got a fairly large video editing job out of that, doing commercials, because I happened to drive the head of
Right.
Extreme Reach, my Joe.
Yeah, you mentioned that in your post.
Yeah. So it's like, you just
Moral of the
don't.
story, get out there, you might meet someone, right?
Well,
So,
that's a lot of that has to do with basically saying, it's an unsure industry for sure. As well as anybody. You watched, how many post houses were there in the 80s? There were tons of them.
yeah.
You couldn't swing a dead cat without hitting one downtown, basically. And then they all and I went through 4 bankruptcies, 4, not personal bankruptcies, but 4 companies that I had worked for that went under.
Right.
And every time, lost this, lost that, had to recover, you adapt or you just get out of the industry.
Well, it's it's tech change.
And that.
Just speaking personally, it's like I always wanted to, as you learn in Ryerson, own the means of production.
Yep.
Right. So, thinking it would be like a recession proof me. I was always like a writer and director, but I shot stuff occasionally because you have to, and eventually I could afford a camera, and eventually I had. And you're talking about the cost of editing suites. People don't understand. Like suddenly, the cost of a laptop or a computer plus the cost of the software. Suddenly I'm editing. Avid media composer or learning, and it started. And I always thought maybe I'd learn enough to do a rough offline or whatever. Take it downtown, pay by this point $200 an hour.
Right.
And I did that once. I was just basically straight cut, edit, dissolve, and you can play with effects. But if I needed graphics, I could drop them in. Somebody else could do them. That's when they started going out of business because Because well, it's the economic factors are undeniable. You
True.
can't compete with
True.
someone like you can get in for
So,
$5,000 instead of
yeah.
you said $500,000 at the beginning.
Well, that was,
That's
and I worked in
but that's
places that had millions of dollars. But
and
here's the
really
thing.
they look better now because it's all
Yep.
again the other part of tech change is it's all HD now, right?
Yep.
Or
4K.
4K even,
Yep.
right? So
So here's the
fascinating.
thing. I taught at Sheridan College for a couple of years in Humber, just as a part-time industry person, and there were always these stereotypes. Well, at Sheridan we use all Apple stuff, so it was Final Cut was
Yes.
the editing system, and I would say, but I don't know anything about Final Cut because I don't use it, but I do know about editing and I do know about compositing, and so I'm not going to teach you how to use software. You're going to learn that on your own. I'm going to teach you about the whole idea of what you're wanting to learn here, editing and doing image compositing work and stuff. And you'll figure out the piece of equipment. It's like a carpenter and his tools, you know. Well, I like to use this hammer, okay, but this hammer you still know how to hammer a nail, right? Bang bang.
And if there's any young editors watching, I mean,
This was always
it's wise to learn multiple pieces
and
of
this
software.
was always the thing because they'd asked me to teach on specific platforms, and I said, no, I don't know those platforms. I'm not going to do a good job. I'll teach on the platforms that I know, but I'm only going to use them as an example.
Yep.
And I said to the kids, I said, if you go out of this course thinking I'm a Adobe After Effects editor or I'm just a
Premiere
or you've limited your options immediately.
Yes.
If you say I'm an editor or I'm a compositor, oh, you use Digital Fusion, you use After Effects, you use Maya. Okay, well the concept is the same.
Yeah.
It's what button does what. You'll learn that. That was a problem I found with the community colleges back then, without very focused, and they got big sponsorship money from these companies,
Right.
by the way. But what I'm leading to here, kind of in a roundabout fashion, is yes, the equipment's cheaper. Yes, I have more power pretty much on my iPhone than I had in a lot of the editing rooms I worked at.
Right.
It's the people running it, and that experience where there are bargain basement people working out of their. It was always a joke. Oh, he's working out of his basement. Guess what? A lot of people do that now.
Yes.
After the pandemic. How many hundreds, maybe thousands of people in this industry ended up working from home? And still work from home.
I mean, if anything, the video editing.
And here we are in
we
your home.
We were doing that years before that became popular because people wouldn't even know where I was.
Yeah.
They didn't need to. I could have been at a ski resort, and I was. I might have been skiing.
Yeah.
I might have been editing in the morning.
Yeah.
Because it's all portable if you have a laptop, right?
Yep.
So things changed a lot for sure.
Yeah.
So I mean, you're a survivor. I mean, knowing, other than being willing to just do anything to pay some bills, what advice could you give to people just starting out as a creative professional, just to survive a long career?
Well, I've had people comment, some of my alumni friends sort of like, wow, you did all of these different things. And, I got a job at the CBC and I stayed there for 35 years. And I'm like, well, you have a pension and I don't.
Yes.
I mean, there's a trade-off.
Yes.
I always thought, depending on what you want to do, I always admired people who had this very fixed kind of, I'm going to be a sportscaster. And so guys like Michael Landsberg, for example, who also worked at CKLN.
Yes.
I'm going to be a sportscaster. And by God, he was a sportscaster and a very good one.
Yeah.
And that was his career. I always thought about, oh, what's down that road? What's down, somebody says, do you want to go on the road with one of the best, more popular bands in the world right now? Geez, that'd be fun. I think, and I learned a lot from that I apply to my daily life even today. The advice I would give to anybody is don't limit yourself by saying, unless you absolutely know, and unless you're a Michael Landsberg or a Paul Romanuk or any of those guys I'm using as an example, that's great, and go for it. But if you want to experience the different kind of flavors of the world, either it's through being able to travel with your job or being able to develop your own material or whatever it is, then look for opportunities that will give you different experiences, because it's the combination of all of those experiences that create, you know, that diversity. As I said, I'm a certified home inspector. I started taking courses, but partially because I'd done training videos for years on that kind of stuff. Then I started working on reality TV shows, and I've also done my own renovations and stuff and built studios. I thought I could do that, and hey, that sounds like a pretty good fallback. I haven't made a lot of money doing it. I don't do it full time, but it's there. And if I had to focus and say, okay, I'm done in television, I've got some place to go.
But how can people get in touch with you if they want to like hire you to do anything?
I'm on LinkedIn, which has my contact information. I'm also on Facebook. There's only, as far as I know, 2 or 3 Graham Saywells in the world.
So Google. You'll find them by Googling.
Yeah, if you Google my name, you'll get the link in the IMDb. I'd love people to reach out, questions. I'm happy to answer anything.
Well, thanks for coming. I appreciate it.
Hey, this was fun.
Long drive.
I didn't know what to expect, and I'm quite glad and lovely to see you again, of course.
Yes, even though you don't remember meeting me. But,
well, the very, very, very first time.
I knew that might stump you. So.
It did.
That's
good job. Good job, mate.
All right. Well, thanks for coming by.
Oh, no problem.